Hi, what's up? I'm Channel Pup, the mascot for the level-headed fanboy. And Sonic Superstars is here, so we're gonna review it. Since the jump to 3D, Sonic's tenure has been a bit rough to say the least. Just kidding, 3D Sonic rocks. I mean, look at this. It's been a good time for our prickly pal. But you know what he has been having a bit of a rough time with? Getting a 2D game to happen post-2010. We had the heyday of 2D Sonic in the 90s, then in the 2000s he was relegated to handhelds, but was still delivering some great experimental games. And then in the 2010s there were attempts at bringing the side-scrolling classic Sonic action into the spotlight on consoles. We had such ambitious masterpieces as the Sonic 4 Saga, the sequel we all waited 16 years for. That, or compilation sets. That's not to say that there weren't some bright sparks, such as Sonic Generations delivering the first crossover between the classic and modern Sonic, and Sonic Mania, which was just to all intents and purposes a great game. However, side-scrolling Sonic never really outgrew nostalgia for me. It was either being intrusively bolted on to the 3D modern playstyle, or it was there to relive the good old days, with the one and only location classic Sonic would ever be interested in visiting, Memory Lane. Now 13 years after side-scrolling Sonic's console renaissance, classic Sonic is back for a side-scrolling adventure, and I wonder what levels they'll be bringing back for this one. Well, what do you mean none? You mean to tell me this game is committed to being a new game? Well, how about that? Honestly, I'd have thought that this would be the obvious way to go when bringing back classic Sonic. You are bringing back a playstyle that needs to remain somewhat familiar, so it's obvious that you pair that with new locations to avoid just selling the same game over and over again. Come to think of it, the never-ending army of collection box sets now makes a lot of sense in my eyes. But hey, we're here now with a brand new classic Sonic game that is committed to being a new game. And boy does it ever feel good to be in that spot at long last. So before we get stuck into Sonic's latest side-scrolling adventure, be forewarned that this review of Sonic Superstars will contain spoilers. But if you want to know whether or not I'd recommend the game, well, just right now, sure, I'll go ahead. If you enjoy the classic Sonic games back on the Sega Mega Drive, then there's not really any reason why you shouldn't have fun with Sonic Superstars. It is more of that. A 2D action platformer at a brisk pace. And Sonic goes blip, doing, and then we all applaud. At the $60 price tag, I'd probably say hold off a little until there's a price drop, unless you are likely to comb through every nook and cranny of this game, get all the collectibles, try all the characters, and so on and so forth. The game's main campaign clocked in about 4 hours for me first run through, and while there is some post-game content to sink your teeth into, like with the other 2D Sonic games, it's the replay value that really buffs out that price tag, for me anyway. So if you're the kind of person that plays a game once and then just moves on to the next, you won't be getting $60 worth of playtime out of this one. So maybe wait. I do think $60 is a little steep for this. I can justify it, but I'm not going to say everyone can justify it. Alright, with that out of the way, if you've played the game or you're just not fussed about going in blind, then stick around because we'll be getting into all of the details when it comes to Sonic Superstars. So the basic concept for Sonic Superstars is that it's an evolution of classic Sonic, if you will. One that, according to Sonic's chief creative officer Takeshi Iizuka, will lay down foundations for the future of this chubbier iteration of Sonic. New foundations for the future of the past Sonic. Kind of poetic. In the same way that Frontiers did for the modern Sonic. Of course, with classic Sonic, it's a well and truly tried and tested formula that they've gotten down to a fine art before completely ballsing up on it on numerous occasions only to get it back down to a fine art. So this isn't quite the big revolutionary step forward for classic Sonic that Frontiers was for modern Sonic. But it doesn't really need to be. So okay, let's talk about the story. That's the framing device of the game at the end of the day. And while it is suitably simple and fairly predictable in parts, that doesn't make it any less effective. You are getting a classic Sonic story through and through. Now, like Sonic Frontiers, the story of this game is relatively self-contained. However, there is supplementary media online to fill in any gaps, basically explaining the how and why that the less casual, sort of die-hard Sonic players may want to know. The story as it's presented in the game is that Dr. Robotnik has arrived on North Star Island, with the help of Fang the Hunter and Trip the Sungazer. The North Star Island is inhabited by giant versions of the familiar creatures that are typically roaming around the realms of the Sonic franchise, at least in the classics anyway. There, Robotnik is searching for a mythical dragon, but when he discovers that Sonic and his friends are hot on his trail, he sends Fang and Trip to dispose of his old enemies. Simple stuff. That's just the short and curlies of it. Throughout the game, you are pursued by Fang with Trip close by, and this odd pairing of the determined bounty hunter and his clumsy partner leads to some fun antics as far as antagonists go. So let's talk gameplay, as admittedly, getting the classic Sonic gameplay right has proven to be pretty difficult for Sega over the recent years. Now, I do want to quickly specify that I think there is a difference between getting the gameplay of classic Sonic right and fully replicating the classics. Yes, the classics absolutely are the blueprint for how Sonic should control, but provided the physics make sense, are reliable, and Sonic feels good to control, then I don't mind if Sonic feels a little different to the classics. With Sonic Superstars, I cannot confidently tell a difference between how Sonic and his friends control here and, say, Sonic Mania, which did still feel a little different to the classics, but not in any way that would make it worse. That can also boil down to things like art style, animation, frame rate, etc. If it looks different, it will feel different. But what it ultimately boils down to is, this is as good as I could ask for. I think they've nailed it. Sonic comes equipped with his usual moveset, including the recent mainstay, the Drop Dash, but there's no Insta-Shield from Sonic 3 or Super Peel-Out from Sonic CD, though. His top speed animation has the figure 8 running animation, just like in Sonic CD, so there is at least an homage to the Super Peel-Out. But then outside of that, yeah, all of the Sonic hallmarks are here. Tails' moveset is identical to in the classics, as is Knuckles, but I'm not entirely sure if Knuckles' climbing feels a little slower than I remember it being. Same goes for maybe the glide. It feels like there's maybe a speed cap on there, where it used to gradually build speed. The biggest departure is Amy, whose classic playstyle has been significantly adjusted since its debut in Sonic Origins Plus earlier this year. And while I did like Amy's playstyle in Origins Plus, I gotta say this is a big improvement. So Amy spins her hammer while jumping by default now, but she can also double jump. Holding the jump button in midair no longer gives her hammer rush like in Origins Plus, instead it causes her to just swing her hammer, and you can choose to do it while running or while static. This version is just more refined and more controlled than the Origins Plus version. It feels just more finished. When I look back on the Origins Plus Amy playstyle, it feels embryonic of what this is. It feels like this is what that wanted to be. Unlike Sonic 3 and Sonic Mania, you don't necessarily have to commit to one character per playthrough, as you can switch to any character you like while in the world map, which is a Generation-style hub world, albeit with nothing new to discover and no NPC characters to interact with, but you can navigate to the in-game shop and view tutorials for each character and ability you've unlocked. If you have bonus skins as well, this is the place to toggle them. It's nice. I like this a lot better than just a level select, but I think it would be really cool if we could populate this with some form of NPC, or maybe have some hidden goodies that we can find. The game is comprised of 11 unique zones containing, well, as many acts as it wants, I guess. Yes, structurally this is an odd one, as it abandons the consistent 2-act per zone structure, nor does it go for the 3-act per zone structure like Sonic 1. Most zones in the game are 2 acts, but there are a few with 3 acts, with that additional act being sometimes mandatory story-centric stages where you're required to play as a specific character. For example, after a spat in Lagoon City, Amy finds a distressed Trip and shows her some of that trademark Amy Rose compassion, which leads to Trip joining the heroes team after defeating her oppressor, Fang. Other zones like Sky Temple, Sand Sanctuary, and Cyberstation consist of just a single act. However, that single act is usually significantly longer than the usual act, clocking in at round about 10 minutes or thereunder for one continuous gauntlet. You start off on Bridge Island, which is your usual sort of tropical paradise on the approach to North Star Island, and this is a terrific opening stage. While it's not the story-centric opener that Angel Island was, it more than makes up for that with just the very multi-layered nature of this stage's design. There's a ton to explore here with goodies to find, but you can also build up some serious speed here, making a fantastic first impression. I think this is a great opening stage. We then follow that up with Speed Jungle, with the first act doing exactly what it says on the tin. It's a jungle and you move at high speeds, with loads of slopes and vines to grind on and launch off of. The grindy vines don't act like your typical Sonic grind rail, however, as you can just cut all of your speed entirely, and you are often required to jump to avoid hazards. Between Acts 1 and 2 is the Sonic Act, and no, I'm not calling it Act Sonic. For some reason this isn't mandatory, considering it's actually quite an important act. It's Sonic's first confrontation with Fang. This is a high-speed chase between the two, as Sonic must outrun Fang's arsenal of advanced weaponry, giving Fang a really strong first encounter. Then after that you have Act 2, where you're required to take things a little more carefully, as much of this stage takes place in the dark with only a glowing butterfly lighting the path for Sonic. I gotta admit though, I think this stage would probably work just fine, if not better, without the darkness gimmick, as there were numerous occasions where I had absolutely no way of seeing a bed of spikes beneath me, and found myself just launching straight into them. Fortunately, the darkness gimmick only occurs for a couple of little sections of Act 2 though, and all things considered, it wasn't outright frustrating. There were just a few times I was like, well, I couldn't see those spikes there. Then we have our third zone, consisting of just one single act, Sky Temple, and surprisingly, this isn't a Sky Sanctuary clone, meaning we've narrowly avoided the Sonic 4 zone rehash allegations. The Sky Temple is an elaborate windy labyrinth in the sky with a few arcadey Breakout-inspired elements. There's also a lot of ideas on display here, including platforms that only fully reveal themselves when you're standing on them, and it's safe to say that from here they're really layering ideas up. Following that, we have Pinball Carnival, which pairs the balloon gimmicks from Carnival Night with the pinball elements from Casino Night, but with just a much more open level design to it, and a cool new token feature where if the player successfully flips all the tokens, they're rewarded with a load of rings, making for a less gambly style of pinball challenge than you'd get in, say, Casino Night. But then Act 2 is more of a House of Horrors, complete with a ghost train mechanic. And again, while this does take inspiration from both Carnival Night and Casino Night, it's a bit more mechanic inspiration than it is aesthetic, because aesthetically speaking it looks nothing like those two. Then there is our fifth zone, Lagoon City, our resident water stage, consisting of 3 acts, which is great because the first act is really short compared to all the other levels in the game. The first act is more the kind of high-speed water slide action you find in Hydro City Act 2 from Sonic 3, which is of course a massive treat. Then there's the mandatory Amy Act where you knock giant fruit around, navigate some more meticulous platforming, and piggyback trip to the finish line. Then with Act 2, we've got a lot of underwater bubble action as you float your way around through different hazards before rushing down giant pipes. Act 2 also has one of the best music tracks in the entire game. Following that though, we've got Sand Sanctuary, which I guess is most comparable to the first act of Sandopolis from Sonic 3, but not really, as you'll be spending the majority of this stage running along the back of a giant snake, and that's just awesome, the same giant snake we saw in the short Trio of Trouble. This is another single act stage, and it's a lot of fun. It never outstays its welcome or becomes too similar to that of Sandopolis. The music is also absolutely top tier, giving us 2 wall-to-wall bangers on this soundtrack. Press Factory is surprisingly nothing like Press Garden from Sonic Mania. I'm starting to sense a theme here. Level names that sound familiar, but the levels themselves aren't. This is a Robotnik factory surrounding a giant hydraulic press, which causes the entire stage to bounce every time it's initiated. Then for the second act, you're followed by a Robotnik drone that's charging up some kind of death ray. And while this does cause instant death, there is plenty of warning and time. Oh, and I probably should mention that there are switches that turn this off. Yeah, no, this isn't a soft lock for the game. You can switch the drone off and then it will restart its cycle again. And these switches are really nicely placed as well. I don't know if this is a popular opinion, but I think Press Factory is one of my favorite stages in this game because it's just such an ingenious design. Especially with Act 2's innovations, as it requires you to pay attention to the background, which makes for quite a fresh challenge that we don't really get in Sonic games. Then there is Golden Capital, which is kind of like a Mayan civilization meets casino stage. Yeah, we've got not one but 2 stages that feature pinball elements, and Golden Capital is incredibly generous with the rings to reward the player. Not just that though, we've also got some gravity features as well, which make for an interesting combination. This is another 3-act stage with a Knuckles act in the middle. It's not mandatory, but again, I think it should be, because it does divulge some fairly important plot information. This tells us how Fang the Hunter obtains the Chaos Emeralds. And in Act 2 is where our final showdown with Fang takes place, and it's a very tough, very long gauntlet, which I'll talk more about once we get to the boss section. Following that, we've got another single-act stage with Cyber Station, and I can tell that this stage is going to be incredibly divisive. Aesthetically speaking, it's incredibly unique. A digital Robotnik base with various portals which transform Sonic into different pixelated characters. It's fun to see the pixel art style paid homage here, and I like how that's been brought to 3D as well. Mechanically speaking, this stage is like a big toy box of different ideas. We've got electrical cables that Sonic can power through, moments where he's transformed into a jellyfish to swim through the stage, you can be transformed into a rocket for the final stretches before the boss fight, and there's a cat and mouse game, which I wasn't so fond of, as you're climbing up these lines to avoid these cats, and it's not initially clear which way you have to go, and these cats can really get in the way. But this puzzle also just kind of blindsides you. It's a very vertical puzzle, but it could be like you're making your way up the left line thinking you're going to make it out, and then you're just met with a hazard which will make you lose your rings, and it's not entirely fair because once you make your way up one line, that's kind of it. It's a one-way track. And you can't see it, and there's no warning. That's a bit dimps for my liking. Once you know how to do it and what you're doing, you can breeze through it pretty easily, and it doesn't take up a large chunk of the stage. But still, I think this one will be better off without that one gimmick, or maybe some telegraphing for the traps above. That being said, I absolutely love this stage. I feel like it's one of the game's best just for how creative it is, and I love the theming. Then there's Frozen Fortress, which is another 3-act stage if you want it to be, I guess. As in, it's really 2 acts that you'll be playing sequentially, but like, when you return to it, there is an extra act for you to play. You can either play as Sonic and navigate your way through the base, or you can play as Tails. So you either get Act 1 or the Tails act, it's up to you to choose. Sonic's act is you traversing through the Frozen Fortress to meet up with Tails. And Tails' act is you traversing through the Frozen Fortress to meet up with Sonic. So the first act, whichever one you choose, takes place in an icy forest where Robotnik has set up camp. You've got a factory full of conveyor belts, claws, ice machines, and so on. Then for the second act, Tails has repaired one of Robotnik's Eggomatic vehicles, which you jump into to fight off enemies, Fantasy Zone style, and face off against a boss in space with your Eggomatic lasers. If you've played Fantasy Zone, which I haven't, this will probably mean a lot more to you, but to be honest, I didn't mind the pace breaker here. It's very easy to get that sort of late game fatigue, and I thought this was great. This was a good way of kind of circumventing that late game fatigue with something simple. And I much prefer this to, say, the Sky Chase level from Sonic 2. This little adventure in the Eggomatic then takes you to the final zone, Egg Fortress, which is your usual Death Egg adjacent finale stage, full of different traps and gimmicks. There are anti-gravity vents that you have to float your way through, navigating your way through different laser fields. Machines you have to fight that fire more lasers at you, just a lot of lasers. Then at the end of Act 1, Dr. Robotnik has a new MacGuffin that can rewind time. So for the second act, you make your way back through what you just did, but now everything is happening in reverse, including like falling platforms, enemies spawning in, and I'm not sure if that's lazy or clever. But I gotta admit, as far as final zones go in Sonic games, I think Egg Fortress is kind of a little forgettable. Wait, hang on. On a whole, I am happy with the level design in this game. I was worried that it would overcompensate for the new power-ups, which we'll talk about soon, making just a regular playthrough without them a bit bland, like what Sonic Colors did to accommodate for the Wisps. But fortunately, that isn't the case here. I think some folks may have issues with how gimmicky these stages are, as there are a lot of areas where the theming has quite a major impact on the gameplay. But honestly, I don't have a problem with this. Classic Sonic stages typically do have unique mechanics that match their theming. and while there has been dialed up a little here, it didn't become intrusive as far as I'm concerned. You've then got the boss fights, which are a little more substantial than in previous games. For starters, they each have a little invincibility window, meaning you can't just wail on them like you could before. This is probably to accommodate for if you were to do a multiplayer co-op run-through, like if you've got 4 characters all just wailing on a traditional style Sonic boss, yeah, it's going to be over in a heartbeat. They want you to actually play these bosses. Each one also has an introductory cutscene, but fortunately on replay you can skip this, so we don't have a Sonic 4 Episode 2 situation where you're just waiting for the boss to finish introducing itself. The bosses in this one are pretty involved, with most of them pertaining to the gimmicks of the zone in some way, with I guess the exception of Bridge Island, which is more just an introductory boss fight. But I especially loved how the boss fight of Press Factory featured Dr. Robotnik with his own little hydraulic press. These boss fights are substantially longer than the typical classic Sonic boss fight, with them ranging between 2 to 5 minutes. We've also got minor bosses for Act 1 just like in Sonic 3 and Sonic Mania. Like the major bosses, they're a bit longer and more challenging, and these are basically the giant badniks containing the giant flicky creatures, including Pig, 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 Piggy, 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 Wiggy, Wiggy, Pig, 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 Wiggy, Wiggy, Pig, 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 Pig. It's especially rewarding to stand with the animal you've saved at the end of the stage as you bounce that goalpost around. But then we've got some more event status boss battles as well. There's our second boss fight with Fang, which is also the final encounter with him for Sonic and the gang. This battle is an arduous gauntlet as you control a moving platform making its way through various hazards and traps Fang has set out for you, while Fang himself tries to attack you in his Marvelous Queen kitted out with all kinds of new gadgets. Fang is out for blood in this game, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm not exactly sure how to feel about this boss fight. It's effectively an auto-scroller, like an evolution of the Sky Chase mechanic, and you can only make your way through this boss as fast as the game wants you to. Also, given the difficulty, you will likely be having to start from the beginning again, and doing that quite a few times, more times than I would have liked, which can get frustrating. This took me about 7 minutes first try, and it doesn't help that the music for this boss loops around the 20-second mark. You can even see a giant Fang-themed mech out in the distance. This represents a major turning point in the story. Trip is reunited with Fang, but he rejects her friendly affections with a swift kick. Jesus, Fang. Fang has since gained all of the Chaos Emeralds as we're shown in the Knuckles act, but fortunately Trip swipes them, goes super, and it turns out she is a dragon! Well, when in her super form anyway. We also get the reveal of her full design as she ditches the helmet and armor. In other words, she gets angry, so she gets naked, just like my school teachers back in the day. That giant Fang mech boss that we're teased with turns out to be more of a red herring, as Super Trip completely disposes of it in an instant. From there, Amy introduces the gang to her new bestie, Trip, and so she joins Team Sonic. Trip has a really good character design as well. She fits in with the gang well, but one thing I really appreciate is that her color palette matches that of Styx the Badger from Sonic Boom. So when you stand these 5 together, it feels a little like I've got my Boom Baby back. Listen, okay, I love my Boom Baby. I guess you could call me a baby boomer. Also, it's pretty nuts that we went from only male hedgehogs can go super to here's a new female lizard character. One of the first things she does is go super. Game apologist is going to have a field day explaining why this one matters. As for Fang's giant mech, I guess you could say that it is a bit of a cop-out that we are teased with a giant mech for Fang that we never actually get to fight, but at the same time I can forgive the fake-out because boy was the initial Fang boss ever long. This would be a sweaty palms experience for most, but not me because I have con-allergic urticaria so I can't afford to sweat. The Cyber Station boss fight is also sweet. You battle against one of the prototype robots from Battle Mode, which has a very similar moveset to Metal Sonic, while Robotnik chases you with a deadly laser. But that's not all. This robot takes on the appearance of your mech choice from Battle Mode. So, theoretically, you could fight against Metal Sonic, Mecha Sonic, Metal Knuckles, any one of these metals if you wanted. It's also awesome that you see Robotnik carrying this robot in the background of some of the stages, and it takes on that appearance there too. This is an awesome idea, and a great way of linking Battle Mode to the main game. Just when you think you have the boss beat and jump on the animal capsule, more of them pop out, including a giant one. I had a fight against a giant Mecha Sonic Mark 1. That makes me really happy. And I just love how we've gone from Sonic Forces, where you make a character that becomes Bezzy mates with Sonic, to Sonic Superstars, where you fight the character you create. That's just brilliant. Then for Frozen Base, you pilot the Eggomatic up into space to fight against Dr. Robotnik's space fighter machines in a space shooter. And it's pretty hilarious that twice in a row now we've had a space shooter boss fight in a Sonic game. This is the future, people. This is the foundation. At least Sonic Superstars had the sense not to make this the finale of the game, because that honor is reserved for the Egg Fortress robot, a giant mech shaped like Robotnik himself that, okay, yes, it does resemble a Death Egg robot in a lot of ways, but it is a different model with completely different attacks. And this is honestly a great final boss. He's tough and takes a bit to work out exactly how to beat him. He's got a great range of different attacks, a couple of different phases, and the difficulty is, I'd say, just right. This fight can be pretty stressful, but it feels fantastic once you've got him beat. The one thing I really don't like about this boss though, because it's genuinely disorienting, and also, why is this here, is that when you go into the phase where he's chasing you from the side, you've got the arena sort of turning in the background, but it doesn't turn smoothly, it snaps back, and this is probably because it's being constantly automatically generated, but it's not a smooth transition. So you've got the background just kind of rotates, and then it snaps, and then it rotates, and then it snaps, and that just looks like garbage. What the hell, Sega? And that's the main story. Sonic and his friends, including Trip, escape the Egg Fortress in one of the Eggomatics, and return to Earth greeted by their flicky friends. Now, I really appreciate Sonic's friends all being aboard the Eggomatic, and that it isn't some bullshit gaslighting, where were you guys this whole time thing either, as you can not only see what the other characters are getting up to in the background of the stages. If you missed that, as I say, you are required to play as certain characters for plot-specific acts, creating brilliant cohesion. But Sonic Superstars has more tricks up its sleeve than just that. Once you beat the main story, you unlock Trip's story, serving as a bit of a sequel to the main story, where the newly reformed Trip heads back out to settle the score with an egg robo that's hunting her down, a bit like Knuckles' story from Sonic 3. And she also settles the score with Fang once and for all. This effectively serves as the game's hard mode, with more traps, more enemies, remixed level designs that make use of Trip's abilities, and boss fights that require more hits. But I gotta admit, I wasn't a huge fan of this, as the enemy placement is straight up Metropolis Zone levels of bullshit sometimes. Fortunately, Sonic Superstars doesn't have a live system, so you don't have to suffer any game overs. And even then, if you were to quit out, you can just start up the act you were playing before, as opposed to being reset to Act 1 like in Sonic Mania. So it's a bit less punishing in that regard. Trip's moveset is like a mix of Amy and Knuckles, in that she has a very reliable double jump, but can also climb walls by curling into a terrible donut. But unlike Knuckles, she can climb more than just straight walls, as she can curl rounded corners. This all just makes her a really welcome addition. But what makes this all worthwhile, what makes this from just a bonus thing to actually a must-play, is that rather than Dr. Robotnik, Fang is the final boss of Trip's story, rocking up in the mech that we were teased with before. And just like the finale of the main story, it's a great boss that keeps you on your toes, probably my favorite of the two final bosses in this game. And that absolutely makes Trip's story a must-play. Because now that throwaway gag actually gets some payoff, and Fang feels like a true thematic nemesis to Trip. It's great to see Trip get her own back, or should I say own knack. He's a mean Jaboa. Trip is also playable in the main story as well, and appears on the title screen next to Tails, which is just a brilliant detail. Now, like other classic Sonic stages, you also have a variety of bonus and special stages. The special stages banking you the Chaos Emeralds. The special stages consist of this kind of grappling hook web swing mechanic as you grapple onto blue spheres, dash rings, and in some cases bombs to catch up to a floating Chaos Emerald that's just flying away from you. You can also run through the air and just really aim yourself for the different things that you want to grapple. These stages are honestly perfectly fun, and can get a little challenging towards the last couple of emeralds. Like with the bosses though, they've made it so that you can't just cheese gaining the Chaos Emeralds now. You can only get one emerald per zone, so no, you can't just jump into different rings hidden throughout the first couple of zones and go super just a couple of zones in like you could in the classics, nor can you farm emeralds from the same portal. This is, in my opinion, a good thing, as it does require you to actually play at least a good chunk of the game as it was actually intended. If you've already got the emerald for a specific zone you're in, the special stage ring will be blue instead of gold, indicating that you won't be getting an emerald out of this portal, and instead, you would be rewarded with tokens which can be spent on cosmetics for your robot in battle mode. So if you want to fight Metal Sonic in the Cyber Station boss, you gotta earn it, and boy do you have to earn it, as these items cost a lot of tokens. Fortunately though, there are many more ways to get tokens. If you cross a checkpoint with 50 rings, like in Sonic 2, a portal will open above it, taking you to a bonus stage, which is more akin to the Sonic 1 special stage. And if you work your way through these trap-laden rotating mazes, you are rewarded with tokens. Tokens can also be gained by playing the fruit acts. So throughout the stages, fruits are hidden about for you to collect. But at the end of Act 2 of any stage, you also have a chance of winning fruit, as the animal capsules now have kind of a Wheel of Fortune feature, where you jump on them at the right time and you'll receive fruit. The fruit acts are devoted entirely to collecting as many rings and tokens as possible before moving on. They're completely optional, but rewarding all the same. Tokens can also be earned for taking part in online battles, and we'll talk more about that later. We've also got little shortcut portals that open up in hidden spaces, and you can basically skip a chunk of the stage, and I don't really think that's necessary, nor do I think it is rewarding to have less game to play, but hey, they're there. That's just one feature I could probably nix. We don't need that, my man. We don't need this. But then another brilliant way they've built upon special stages is that there's a lot more reward for collecting the Chaos Emeralds now, as each emerald grants you a unique power-up. These are a bit more akin to the Wisps from Sonic Colors and the Elemental Shields from Sonic 3. Each emerald granting you a unique ability. These can be used to explore every nook and cranny of these stages hunting for tokens, but can also be used to ace specific challenges. Boss fights and complex platforming sections can be completely trivialized by using these abilities. About to drown? Using your water ability will save you. While these aren't mandatory, the game absolutely rewards you for exploring stages in depth and thinking outside the box, and unlike the elemental shields, all of the benefits of these can be used across all of your characters. Not to mention that your emeralds are shared across all the characters on your save. These abilities are timed though, and can only be replenished by crossing a checkpoint. It can be a checkpoint that you've already crossed before as well. Now, once you've got all emeralds collected, you gain your super form for literally all of the characters. Even Feels the Rabbit gets a super form, which is pretty nuts. I'm looking forward to game apologists' why Super Rabbit matters. Trip's super form is probably the most unique because she transforms into her dragon form and can just fly throughout the entirety of the stage. However, there are still platforming areas that will take you into the background of the stage to be accounted for, so no, you can't just fly right. Fortunately, she does have a ground form, which is more of this small globe, but it's not very reliable. I'm not gonna pretend that Super Trip doesn't completely break the game. She absolutely does. I think if we had a toggle button between a more consistent ground form and the dragon form, this would go a long way to just making this better. As for the super forms of the other characters, you've got your usual Super Sonic, who sadly carries over to the Lego skin too, so no Super Lego Sonic. Which is especially sad considering a model of that does exist in Lego Dimensions, but hey, it is what it is. Then the other characters just kind of have a white glow. I don't think Super Knuckles is even pink this time. He just glows. Perhaps that's what the intention always was, I don't know. I'm gonna game drop name apologist again because forms are kind of his forte, and he's either going to be relatively happy everyone got a super form, or livid that the form isn't anything outright special. He's one of two things, there is no middle ground with that man. Anywho, once you've gained all of the Chaos Emeralds and beaten both the main story and Trip story, you unlock the last story, and the adventure fan inside me is absolutely tickled pink at the fact that a classic Sonic game is following the adventure story structure. So for the last story, the Dimensional Dragon, who I've affectionately dubbed Spyro, awakens a little too late for Dr. Robotnik to really enjoy. And so Sonic must go Super to battle this final enemy, as he teams up with Trip, who helps him contain the dragon. I'm not gonna lie, as cool as this is, it is pretty divorced from the rest of the story. We don't really know why the dragon emerged or what its beef with Sonic is. It's pretty much completely disconnected from the rest of the story. I would have been perfectly satisfied with the twist that Super Trip was the dragon Robotnik was hunting all along, but hey, I'm not going to complain about another Supersonic boss fight, keep them coming. Although I will say I think more could have been done with like the Supersonic and Super Trip team up. Maybe have them switch between hits on the dragon, akin to like Sonic and Shadow in the final Hazard boss fight. But nah, Trip's job is just to kind of catch the amulet and then seal the dragon back in. It is interesting though that we are ending a classic Sonic game, not just with the last story, but with Super Sonic facing off against a monster rather than Dr. Robotnik. We are definitely seeing a marriage of modern and classic Sonic tropes here, which is great to see, as I've never felt the codes and conventions of the modern and classic Sonic games should ever be mutually exclusive. You've also got the multiplayer options. Let's start with the co-op. Up to 4 players can play together for the local co-op and progress through the story. There are, of course, character-specific acts which can mostly be bypassed, but they are strictly single-player. The rest you can go to town on with your friends, and I mean, what do I even say about this? It's not co-op, it's a cry for help. I suppose it's as cooperative as your friends are, so provided you're not paired up with some dickhead who's more interested in blazing the stage as fast as they can, you can maybe squeeze some form of cooperative experience out of it. But from my experience, it was my dickhead best friend flatmate switching to his super form and blazing off in the distance while I continually pressed the A button in a bid to get just a few seconds of play out of the experience. Thing is though, it's an absolute no man's land. It doesn't matter who's more skilled, who has more play experience, who's ahead, anything like that. You could literally be behind the other player crawling in mud and eating feces, but you still have a chance of the camera favoring you. There's fun to be had with the multiplayer, but it's nothing of any structure, meaning, or substance. It's just absolute luck of the draw chaos, and the fact that the marketing for this game so heavily leaned on this element honestly feels kind of like a sneak, especially with how curated the footage of the multiplayer was in the trailers. But that's not the only option for if you're some wayward social butterfly who absolutely must interact with others. You also have the battle mode. So for battle mode, you play as a robot fighter, and you can kit it out with all kinds of cosmetic items and paint jobs that can be bought with the tokens. Oddly enough, the paint jobs are a single-time use, so you'll always have a reason to pick up some tokens if you enjoy continually changing your robot. I bought the Digital Deluxe just so I could play as Mechasonic Mark 1, and so I honestly just stuck with Mechasonic Mark 1. It's just so good to see him in 3D. Now, battle mode can be done locally or online, or if you'd rather play on your lonesome, you can just play with a load of AIs, which is fitting considering these are robots. So, think Sonic meets Fall Guys. You get a set of 3 unique challenges, and whoever scores the most wins. Heck, the results screen even does the Fall Guys thing of chucking the other bots off of their podiums. So the different challenges consist of the following. You've got a free-for-all where you're just shooting beams at other bots and whoever gets the most kills wins. You've also got just kind of a standard race. You've got survival where the platforms are constantly falling and rockets are being shot at you. And a star collection game. These can take place in a variety of locations, including a likely mandatory appearance of Green Hill Zone, which admittedly looks really nice in this game, as they've very faithfully replicated the original stage's art style. You've got Press Factory and Frozen Base. There's also a LEGO version of Green Hill Zone, which has elements of the different playsets, so I think that's really neat. That's a decent little bit of product placement there. There might be some more in there, but I haven't encountered any other stages outside of the aforementioned. And of course, each location has different gimmicks, like in the main game. Green Hill Zone is your bog standard stage. No real gimmicks here, you got slopes, platforms, loops, just the basics. Lego Green Hill is made of blocks and consists of less slopes and more blocks, if that makes sense. Press Factory has the big hydraulic press bouncing you around, and Frozen Base has the conveyor belts, which you can change their direction to confuse the other players. You can also get different power-ups that can either have you running faster, shooting better projectiles, or laying down banana peels to trip up your opponents. Honestly, I had a surprising amount of fun with this, and I can think of some specific folks I'm looking forward to playing this with. Then there's the game's presentation. A big part of Sonic Superstars' marketing was that it gives classic Sonic a fresh new look, and well, kinda. It's the first time we've seen it to this extent and in its own game, but we've pretty much seen this art style before in Sonic Generations and Sonic Forces. Admittedly, this is an improved version of it, but it's not like that new. It's not like something you should sell the entire game based on. But what I will say is that with all the improvements, this game does look fantastic. The classic cast have been translated from sprites to 3D models really nicely, nicer than they were in Generations. The character animations are a squash and stretch masterclass, showing Sonic Frontiers how it's done. This is some of the best character animation we've ever had in a Sonic game. Everything feels characterized and weighted. It's why I'm hard-pressed to confirm or deny that the physics are one-to-one with Mania. Animations can greatly impact the feeling of weight to a character. The one thing I will say is there's a surprising lack of blinking. It's like the blinking, they only blink when they're just about to go into their idle waiting animation. Sonic team, whoever's behind this, I'm noticing a trend here. Since Sonic Forces, you've really been slacking on the blinking. Characters need to blink. Otherwise, those giant mono eyes will dry out and crust over and it'll be horrible. Unless we're setting up the next game, Sonic Blindness. The Sonic game where you can't see shit, so it still has better art direction than Sonic Frontiers. The environments in this game look terrific as well, with that quintessentially Sonic-y look, where it's very cartoony but still feels tangible and textured. I also love how they incorporate that extra dimension into gameplay by having both the foreground and background elements both interactive, not too dissimilar to Klonoa. In fact, I did notice some areas where there are some similarities between Sonic Superstars and Klonoa artistically. Sky Temple looks kinda similar to the Ruin of the Wind Kingdom from Klonoa Door to Phantomile. Both acts of Pinball Carnival bear striking resemblance to the Kingdom of Joyland from Lunatea's Veil. Lagoon City looks very similar to Jugpot, and Golden Capital looks similar to some areas of Queronia. But then I notice areas where it feels like Sega may have been trying to appeal to the PlayStation crowd, as stages like Cyber Station feel inspired by Astro's Playroom, especially with the robot fighters, which look really similar to Astro himself. It's all stuff I'm happy to see. I really appreciate this new aesthetic, and while stage designs aren't as chock full of references as they are in Sonic Mania, I'm okay with this. This isn't so much about celebrating the past so much as it is about moving forward. That's not to say these stages don't have references to Sonic's past though. There's just far fewer and further between. The loops in Golden Capital are lifted from the Sonic 1 concept art, and you can see different variations of Robotnik's Egg-O-Matic in the background of Act 1 of Egg Fortress. While on the visual presentation, we've also got new hand-drawn cutscenes, this time by a different studio. I'm not sure exactly who, but it isn't Powerhouse, nor is Tyson Hess involved this time. And you can tell the difference. These aren't as pristine as the Powerhouse ones, with the characters occasionally going a little off-model and movement being a bit less smooth, but put it this way, this is still gorgeous animation. The quality that comes with Powerhouse is not to be taken for granted or as the standard, because it is exceptional in every regard. This here is also really nice, and a worthy substitute, but it's not absolutely flawless like the Powerhouse stuff is. I think the title animation gets a little too ambitious with its camera movement constantly flipping and turning, which can lead to it feeling a little choppy. But again, these flaws are only really in reference to how incredible Powerhouse are. And this game probably has the largest amount of hand-drawn cutscenes of any of the recent classic Sonic releases, as you've got the title cutscene, the opening cutscene, and 6 different endings. Then there's the music, and to be honest, you barely need to talk about the music when reviewing a Sonic game. What's to say? It's good, right? Right? Actually, this one's a little complicated. Sonic Superstars' soundtrack has proven to be one of the more controversial elements of the game, and I can absolutely see why. The first half of the game is pretty much wall-to-wall bangers as far as stage themes are concerned, but then the second half abruptly changes the music style completely. You've got 4 different styles here, and it changes without rhyme or reason. Sure, Sonic Frontiers had a number of different styles, but it made sense as these were allocated to different gameplay formats. For Sonic Superstars, the music style just changes on a whim. So you've got the style established in Sonic CD evolved by T-Lopes for Sonic Mania, where it's got a very 90s New Jack Swing vibe without the limitation of FM synthesizers, which I think most would agree is the quintessential music style for classic Sonic going forward. It kind of feels like how classic Sonic music was supposed to sound when you hear the FM synth tracks. But then you've got some tracks that just are FM synth tracks for some reason. Then you've got other tracks that have a slightly modernized approach to the FM synths, bringing in more EDM elements. And then you've got tracks that sound closer to Sonic 4 Episode 2. Pick a lane, Sonic Superstars! It doesn't make any sense to regress to the FM synths when composers like T-Lopes have demonstrated that you can keep the same spirit of classic Sonic tracks while using more contemporary arrangement. And worse yet, they literally did this in this very game. Every T-Lopes track here is an absolute banger, but it leads me to wish he composed for the entire game, which is crazy considering you've got some of Sega's absolute top brass in terms of music veterans working on this soundtrack. I could understand if it were like chiptunes for the battle mode and then the rest of the game is T-Lopes style, but it just abruptly changes in the second half. That being said though, the tunes are good, even the more chiptuney sounding ones. A lot of folks have clowned on Press Factory Act 1, but honestly, it's a banger. It's just that it doesn't really fit in a game with a modernized art style. Actually, that reminds me, Azuka said that Sonic Team wanted to move away from pixel art because it dates the game and would alienate contemporary players. Okay, with that in mind, why do we have this modernized art style paired with chiptunes? Again, the compositions are absolutely there, but I just don't understand these arrangements. It sounds like they never got round to mastering half the soundtrack and that we just switched to demo tracks, which might actually be the case considering that the demo tracks leaked online and they all use that very Sonic 4 sounding synth. We also hear in the credits rendition of every track as well. That said, again, it's good. The only area where this truly became a problem for me was the boss theme, because not only do we have synths that sound a lot like Sonic 4, complete with the overuse of the Sonic 1 snare, it is repetitive as hell. It's a 20-second loop, and some of the boss fights can go on for around 4 minutes. Pair that with the fact that this melody just feels like a first draft of the GUN boss theme from Sonic Adventure 2. This is, by far, the worst boss theme in any classic Sonic game. But again, there are plenty of bangers here. Even if this OST is probably one of the most stylistically confused OSTs for any Sonic game, all the Bridge Island tracks are great. All of the Speed Jungle tracks as well, they're great. I enjoy Sky Temple a lot. The Pinball Carnival tracks are excellent, as are the tracks for Lagoon City. In fact, Lagoon City Act 2, probably the highlight of the soundtrack, up there with Sand Sanctuary's music. Those two, yep, absolute highlights of the game. But I also love the Press Factory and Cyber Station tracks. Oh shit, I damn near named every stage in the game. Very few of these tracks are bad. The boss theme, yeah, that's bad. But the real problem here is that Sonic Superstars doesn't have a musical identity to call its own. It just hasn't landed on a style. That being said, the tracks that sound very Sonic 4 have me hoping they'll release modern skins for the cast so I can pretend that I'm finally playing the long-awaited, eagerly anticipated Sonic 4 Episode 3. While we're talking negatives as well, I've encountered a glitch where if you approach a boss fight in your super form, when it automatically busts you out, the stage music plays instead of the boss music. Then when you beat the boss, it starts playing another instance of that stage music over the top of the other. In co-op, if one player is in their super form, it will play over the level music. Also, the sped up music tracks for the Speed Shoes power-up just sound wrong. I'd rather have a designated track for this a la Sonic CD or Adventure or Mania. Speaking of bugs, actually, I did encounter a couple bugs where standing atop the corner of a crushing platform registered as a crush death. And that was pretty annoying. It's bad enough Sonic only has to squish his toe to register a crush death in Sonic Origins, yet here you have a crush death when standing atop the crushing down platform. Also, the stages aren't quite as walled as they should be. What I mean by this is there are areas where you can continuously glide as Knuckles or fly as Tails, and you'll eventually just go out of bounds and fall into a bottomless pit. There should be some form of boundary there. It's not a common occurrence by any means, but the attention to detail isn't quite on par with, say, Sonic 3 in that regard. All that being said though, those are my only real issues with the game. I think there is room for improvement. I'd definitely appreciate if we could have a companion character with us in single player. I think a more cohesive soundtrack will go a long way, and there are just a few bugs that could be ironed out, but this is still a really solid product. It definitely feels significantly more polished than, say, Sonic Frontiers did. That's not to say that I think this is better. If you ask me which game I prefer and which game I think is the better overall game, I'd say Sonic Frontiers in a heartbeat. That's partly down to my own preferences, but even with these few technical hitches, Sonic Superstars is definitely the more polished product. I think of the two, let's say, neo-classic Sonic games, so that's Sonic Mania and Sonic Superstars, I don't think this is going to be a popular opinion, but it is my opinion that Superstars is the stronger of the two. Mania is an objectively very well-made game, expertly and lovingly constructed from top to bottom. I don't want to discount that for even a second. The Mania team did incredible work, and I really hope they will come back for more. I'd love to see them make something with 3D gameplay. But for me, Sonic Superstars just fundamentally aligns better with what I want from a new classic Sonic game. And that's that top to bottom. It's new, it's fresh. There's no returning level themes or stage layouts here, bosses, anything like that. I love that Fang the Hunter is getting his time in the spotlight, and I think Trip is an excellent addition to the cast. I'm hoping we'll see more of her. I'd love to see both Trip and Fang in a modern game someday. I feel a bit more strongly about the return of Fang than I do the return of Mighty and Ray. I've always felt he had an awesome design, you know? And I really like the new look for this game. As much as I like the pixel art style from Sonic Mania and the classics, I'm more than happy to embrace this new clean look for Sonic. Heck, have you seen the comic skins? They're Amazon exclusive where I'm from. Man, if we could get a whole game of that's gotta be the goal, right? That's Optimum Sonic. I know I'm rambling here. Look, Sonic Superstars didn't blow me away, and I don't think it will blow anyone away, no matter how good it is. No matter how good future installments will be, I don't think anyone is going to be blown away by a new classic Sonic game now. Because the thing is, between Sonic Advance and Sonic Mania, a new classic Sonic game was like a unicorn, you know? With an attempt at capturing that magic, the majority of which fell flat on their faces. But like, we're here now. Sonic Superstars doesn't need to blow me away. It's more classic Sonic. It's fresh new classic Sonic, and that's the most I can ask for it to be. And I think Sonic Superstars absolutely succeeds with flying colors at just being that. Sonic Superstars honors everything that made the original Sonic games great while finding new and meaningful ways to build upon that. And that's just about the best thing it could do. So Sonic Superstars is great. So what do you guys think? Have you played Sonic Superstars? What do you think of the game? What do you think of my review? Comment below, discuss. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below is a link to my Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get exclusive updates on the upcoming short film, Speeding Ticket, A Sonic Adventure, while also getting your name in the credits of these videos. A special shout out goes to the patrons in the $10 tier, who are
Can't wait to see 9.
Is that fair? Can I do that? Can I read your names while making them completely unrecognizable? You'll get the next video, I guess. Then in the $5 tier, we have KLX, Richard Rogers, SSS06, Dazzle Fizzle, and Vera Wild. Thank you so much for your generosity, folks. And to all of you at home, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.